Russian President Vladimir Putin celebrated his 71st birthday on October 7th amidst a complex political climate. On this day, Hamas launched the brutal assault against Israel. Well over 1,000 Israelis have been killed, including infants, women, and the elderly. Israeli forces have launched a ferocious air and artillery assault on Gaza, targeting key military and command positions of Hamas. With Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant vowing mighty revenge, Israel has mobilized nearly 400,000 of its reserves. Such a catastrophic security shock in the Middle East was probably a welcome surprise for a Russian president whose strategic priority is to divert U.S. support and attention away from Ukraine. For many, it's tempting to see Putin as a mastermind or puppetmaster, stirring up more conflicts than the West can cope with. It raises a question: was it a Hamas birthday gift or just a coincidence? President Vladimir Putin said the attack was rooted in the inability to create a sovereign Palestinian state in line with United Nations resolutions that he called a gross injustice. He noted that Israel's settlement policies have exacerbated the situation. Putin called it a reflection of what he called a glaring failure of Washington's peacemaking efforts, charging the U.S. has focused on offering economic handouts to Palestinians while paying little attention to their fundamental issues related to statehood. At the same time, he urged the Israeli government and Hamas not to target civilians and emphasized that every effort must be made to quickly end the war, saying an escalation would raise grave risks. The carefully calibrated statements by Putin and his lieutenants reflect an effort by Moscow to maintain good ties with both Israel and the Palestinians. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov emphasized that Moscow must remain a balanced approach and talk to both parties, noting it should allow Russia to help broker a settlement. While jockeying as a potential peacemaker, Moscow also hopes the fighting will distract Washington and its allies from the war in Ukraine and eventually erode Western support for Kiev. Peskov even taunted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, saying he must feel jealous about how the U.S. is now forced to focus on military assistance to Israel. So how involved are the Russians? Throughout the Cold War, Moscow strongly backed the Palestinians and other allies in the Arab world against Israel, giving them military and political support. The Soviet Union broke diplomatic ties with Israel after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. Moscow's policies began to shift as Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev reshaped foreign policy and relations with Israel shortly before the 1991 collapse of the USSR. After the Soviet breakup, Russia and Israel have steadily expanded trade and other contacts and strengthened their security ties. Also, more than 1 million people from Russia and other parts of the former Soviet Union have moved to Israel, a development that Russian and Israeli officials described as a major factor in cementing ties. However, after Putin took power, he sought to revive old Middle Eastern alliances while maintaining warm ties with Israel. Russia joined a quartet of Middle East peacemakers along with the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations, but it played a minor role in efforts compared with the U.S. Moscow's relations with Israel remained strong amid Russia's operations in Syria, even as the Israeli military frequently attacked Iranian forces that had teamed up with Russian troops in the country. It is surprising because Russia has long courted the Islamist militants. Moscow has repeatedly hosted Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas, but also has reached out to Hamas. Several Hamas leaders have visited Moscow, including Ismail Haniyeh, who held talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in September 2022. After Saturday's assault, the Russians were quick to dust off old plans to pull Israel's borders back to where they were in 1967. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the creation of a Palestinian state was being thwarted by the destructive policy of the U.S., and you could almost hear the purr of satisfaction when a gloating former president Dmitry Medvedev dismissed the Hamas attacks as an expected development and turned his anger against the West. Does this suggest Russia had a direct hand in the attacks? That seems improbable. Russia is nowhere near as important as Iran when it comes to Hamas arms and financing. Putin didn't ignite this crisis, but he's now happy to slosh fuel on the fire and play it to his advantage. However, relations with Iran grew even closer amid the Syrian war when they teamed up to back Assad's government. Amid the war in Ukraine, Iran has provided Moscow with hundreds of Shahed exploding drones that the Russian military has used against Ukraine's energy facilities and other key infrastructure. Iran has reportedly shared its drone technology with Russia, which built a facility to produce them. In return, Moscow is expected to offer Iran advanced fighter jets and other modern weapons. The flirtations with Hamas and support for the Palestinians also help Putin with his push to style himself as an important player in a global realignment against the West with the likes of China and Iran. Just days ago, he said that Russia's intention was to build a new world, blaming the West for the war in Ukraine, and said the conflict was being fought over the principles on which the New World Order will be based. So, will Putin's wishes materialize and the United States will stop sending military help to Ukraine? U.S. President Joe Biden pledged to bolster military support for Israel following an unprecedented attack by Hamas militants and prompted an intense retaliation against the Palestinian-controlled Gaza Strip. His promise raised questions about whether Washington can ramp up defense aid to Israel without jeopardizing aid for Ukraine. So far, the U.S. has provided Ukraine with $44 billion in military assistance since Russia's invasion, including tanks, rockets, and millions of rounds of ammunition. Biden administration officials insist Washington can absolutely do both, but acknowledge there will be challenges. With the latest U.S. announcement of a new $200 million military assistance package for Ukraine, seems like the recent events in Israel will not have a dramatic effect on the support for Ukraine. But of course, a lot will also depend on the length of the conflict in the Middle East. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Also, visit our second channel with military power comparisons. See you next time.